By October 1942, the North African campaign was a grinding, relentless theater of war. But among the Allied air crews battling the heat and the Luftwaffe, strange rumors had begun to circulate. They spoke of a German pilot flying with the JG-27 squadron who operated differently than his peers. Crews of RAF Wellington bombers returned with stories that defied the brutal logic of the desert. They claimed this unknown fighter had intercepted their crippled aircraft only to escort them safely away from danger. Other stranded airmen reported a lone Messerschmitt circling their position deep in the wastes, dropping survival supplies to keep them alive until rescue teams arrived. In a conflict driven by total destruction, these quiet anomalies stood out. They hinted at an enemy navigating the skies with a personal code that remained anonymous, until one encounter forced his identity into the light. On the 10th of October, Wing Commander John Hamilton Nicholls of 601 RAF Squadron was patrolling alone at 36,000 feet. Without warning, a pair of German Bf-109s broke through the heavy cloud cover. Nicholls was an ace himself, and he immediately pushed his Supermarine Spitfire into a series of violent, evasive turns. Realizing they couldn't match the British fighter's turning circle, the two German pilots split apart, bracketing the Spitfire from opposite angles. Seeing his pursuers drift out of sight, Nicholls relied on the climbing power of his Merlin engine. He pulled the nose up into a steep ascent through the dark, thin air. The Germans stayed with him. 3 20mm rounds tore through his aircraft. One exploded against the heavy radio pack behind his seat. The blast threw him forward, fracturing his vertebrae and instantly knocking him unconscious. Dozens more rounds shredded the fuselage and severed critical control cables. Deprived of its pilot and its steering, the battered fighter stalled and snapped into a violent downward spiral. For 35,000 feet, the Spitfire fell like a stone. The German pilots followed the debris trail downward, watching the machine plunge toward the dunes. Just 2,000 feet above the ground, Nicholls jolted awake. He fought through the pain of his cracked spine and somehow leveled the controls. But as the horizon steadied, he looked over his shoulder to see a Bf-109 still tracking him. His aircraft was barely flying, and his injuries made bailing out impossible. Trapped with an enemy on his tail, Nicholls closed his eyes and waited for the final burst. Several seconds passed in quiet. When he opened his eyes, he found the two fighters holding position off both his wings, matching his speed. The German pilot stared at him, openly stunned that he had survived a 6-mile freefall. They flew together over the desert floor until the two attackers slowly waggled their wings, offered a salute, and broke away. Luftwaffe records would later confirm the identity of the flight leader that day. It was 22-year-old Hans Joachim Marseille. Known as the Star of Africa, Marseille was one of the most lethal and celebrated fighter aces in his squadron. Yet as they followed the Spitfire down and saw Nicholls recover, Marseille radioed a strict command. He ordered his wingmen to hold fire, threatening to shoot him down himself if he disobeyed. For Marseille, victory in the air meant defeating the machinery of his opponents. Executing a helpless man who lost his aircraft held no honor. This strict personal code was born from a haunting mistake made months earlier. In May of 1942, Marseille had engaged an American-built P-40 Warhawk piloted by Graham George Buckland. After damaging the aircraft, Marseille watched Buckland bail out, only to see his parachute fail. The image of Buckland falling to his death shook the German ace. As soon as he returned to base, Marseille commandeered a truck and drove out into the scorching heat to locate the crash site. He recovered Buckland's identification papers, marked the grave. The next day, he dropped a message over Allied lines detailing the young officer's resting place. Watching Nicholls pull out of his dive, Marseille was presented with the exact same scenario. Sparing the British commander was a deliberate choice to prevent another senseless death. Nicholls managed to limp his ruined Spitfire safely back to base. He survived the war and lived a long, peaceful life, passing away at age 100. The encounter stayed with him. In 1943, Flight Commander Nicholls cornered a German Focke-Wulf 190. Remembering North Africa, he forced the enemy fighter to land instead of destroying it. A single decision to withhold fire spawned a chain reaction of restraint, preserving lives on both sides of the conflict. It stands as a quiet reminder that amid the absolute destruction of global war, individuals still have the power to define what humanity looks like.